Call the meeting to order. President Donald Tusk of the European Council, I would point out this hammer is adapted from my grandfather's hammer. I was born in Gdańsk. He used this to build ships. As you know, Gdańsk is a great shipbuilding center. It also comes in handy for making gołąbki. So the simulation is a 2-week sequence. Comes at the end of the class. It's designed in a way to present a real-world scenario for students and to give them essentially an opportunity to role play in solving problems.
It's interesting when you theoretically study something, anything is possible, but when you're forced into a simulation type experience, you really have to think about what's practical in the real world, what would resonate with constituents. There are many different things to take into consideration.
It really blew me away how fun it was. I was not expecting to be so involved, but because everybody got so into their roles, became so familiar with their countries, politics, and the interests they were representing, it made for such an interesting experience.
I think the biggest thing for me was that I was playing the United Kingdom, which was kind of the villain of the simulation, so to speak. A very Eurosceptic country, coping with its own kind of internal matters right now with the referendum voting to leave the European Union. And I had to advocate positions that I personally really don't agree with. It developed as our foreign policy the concrete goal of defeating ISIS in Syria. We had this concrete goal developed in Westminster, and the US and Russia and Turkey have offered us the best means possible to achieve this goal.
I think it really was a great example of how tough consensus is, and at the same time, it was a great example of how like-minded smaller countries in the EU, if they bond together and unite, can influence decisions as well.
One of the interesting dimensions of this simulation is that they have to know something about the technical aspects of a policy issue, but they also have to take into account political pressures. I mean, for example, if you're playing the president of France and you're sitting up there looking at the table and thinking about immigration as a problem, you could conceivably look at that as an analytical observer and say, well, we ought to do this and that. But if you're also forced to think about what the reaction is going to be at home to a decision that admits thousands of additional refugees into your country, you're going to look at that issue a little differently.
Well, the best part of the simulation was that we got assigned a country. So I was Spain, and I thought that was the best way of really getting into it, because you have to read into your country's history, your politics. You have to figure out what your country stands for.
Motion?
Yes, as Spain collective raised the motion that we should put in close cooperation with NATO, because that way we can bring in or tie in Turkey and US, who are both members of NATO, without completely naming them.
There's so many exciting things that this program provides. You can go into the public sector, you can go into the private sector, you can work on policy, you can work in trade. I'm a great believer in the transatlantic partnership, and so I would definitely want to become a leader in transatlantic relations. It's really a wonderful opportunity to mix everything and anything that you want to.
And this deal, I think, addresses all of our internal and external needs. And as the representative from the Netherlands said, we also stand by our commitment to human rights and our values. I strongly encourage us to move in an unmoderated caucus and to hammer out the finer points and details of this agreement, to get it passed as soon and as quickly as possible, and then to move on to more pressing issues. We only have one chance and one vote for this to work, so we need to make sure we're all on the same page and we're all in agreement. Thank you.
Our first day of our history class, Professor Daniels mentioned that it's a tradition at the end of all German classes to knock on the desk to kind of signify the end of class, to signify, a thank you to students for participating, a thank you to the professor for lecturing. So we sort of took that on as our own.
I actually can't remember this happening in the past. I mean, this in many ways was a unique group. They got into it, I have to say. I tell students, you're not being graded on your acting. This isn't a course in in thespianism or anything. It's all about the content. So if you're a bit shy, that's fine. But many just kind of throw themselves into it. This year, the class went out and bought themselves little flags, and just had a grand time with it. So it's always a pleasure for me to do this. This is my favorite part of the course. I hope it is for them, but it certainly is my favorite part of the course. All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? Congratulations.